with it, and we discussed what is life, where we talked about the different kinds of interaction that occurs between the biomolecules such as protein, carbohydrates, fats, and they ultimately result into growth, development, responsiveness, adaptation, reproduction. All these characteristics also a little bit we have discussed. In a nutshell, we have also discussed about the characteristics of living beings such as growth, reproduction, body organization, consciousness, metabolism, cellular organization, and all. We also started with what is growth, right? I told you that it is the twin characteristics of growth includes your increase in mass and increase in number of individuals. These are the twin characteristics of growth. You need to remember that. We have discussed that also. We talked a little bit about reproduction also, and I told you why growth cannot be considered as a defining feature of a living being, right? Because non-living things also grow. So we have discussed that. Reproduction also, same thing. There are certain organisms which don't reproduce, still they are living. So we cannot consider reproduction also as a part of the living entity. Okay, so it's also not a defining feature of living organisms. Then let's quickly talk about something called metabolism. Okay, and this metabolism we have also discussed earlier, and I told you what this metabolism is. It's basically includes all the chemical reactions that are occurring inside your body. So chemical reactions occurring inside the cells, this is what metabolism is. If you have to categorize metabolism into two parts, you can do it by naming them as anabolism and catabolism. Okay, we have discussed this also earlier. Catabolism. So what is anabolism? Anabolism is basically addition of substances in a reaction. Catabolism means the breakdown of certain compounds to release something else. Okay, so that is collectively known as metabolism, and this metabolism is the characteristic of living beings only. Okay, so you see, as all living organisms are made of chemicals. So that is what is written here. We already know that all the living organisms are made up of chemicals. Our body is nothing but a bundle of chemicals. Okay, and those chemicals are constantly interacting with each other. Number of chemical reactions are occurring inside our body, and number of biomolecules are being produced and being broken down. Okay, so all these reactions which are occurring inside your body is actually keeping you alive. Okay, so these chemicals are constantly being made and changed into some other biomolecules. So you remember in the last class also I told you that different biomolecules such as proteins, carbohydrate, fats, all these are constantly being formed inside our body and are being interchanged also. Right, so you will find that it happens that sometimes the fat molecules break down to become carbohydrate, certain protein molecules break down to become carbohydrate. So they are all interchangeable, but whenever it is required, only then that will happen. Normally, what happens inside a cell is that a normal chemical reaction will take place to produce these biomolecules, but yes, they can interchange with one another. The sum total of all the chemical reactions occurring in our body is called metabolism. So as I told you, metabolism is what? The chemical reactions occurring inside our cells or our body. Okay. Non-living objects do not exhibit metabolism. Okay. Of course, metabolism is one such criteria or characteristic which is only applicable for living beings. There's no living object which exhibits metabolism. If it starts to do metabolism, then obviously it will become living, but it does not do so. Metabolic reactions can be demonstrated outside the body also in a cell-free system. If I have to take an example, children, if you remember your in class 10th, you have studied about the nutrition in animals. There you saw that our alimentary canal is distributed with number of different organs, and the number of different functions occur in different organs. For example, let's say mouth. Okay, inside your mouth there's something called saliva which comes out, and the function of saliva is to digest the carbohydrate that enters your mouth, right? So you are already aware that your saliva contains an enzyme called salivary amylase, isn't it? It contains salivary amylase. What is the function of the salivary amylase? It is to digest carbohydrate, isn't it? So you see this reaction which is occurring between the enzyme and the substrate, which is the carbohydrate, it is actually occurring inside your body, and this will continue to happen inside your stomach also, in your intestine also. You know, there are a number of enzymes that will be secreted by your pancreas and all. They will continue to work on the food. Okay, so all such reactions are actually occurring inside your body. But if we try to replicate the same reaction outside, can we do that? Yes, of course we can do that. What we have to do is we have to take a test tube like this, okay, and then we have to put some starch grains. Let's say we have put some rice grains, boiled rice grains inside, okay, inside the test tube. So this boiled rice grain that we have taken, let us write it down here, boiled rice grain. So this boiled rice grain is completely made up of starch, isn't it? Starch, which is a carbohydrate, right? So this carbohydrate, which is now present here, should be reacting with salivary amylase if I put it there, because the same thing is happening inside our mouth. So the same thing can happen outside also, in the test tube also. So we have taken a boiled rice grain and then we have put some salivary amylase here, which means that from our mouth we accumulate saliva and then we spit it in the tube. So now what is happening is that this salivary amylase has now entered into the test tube. Let's say this is the salivary amylase, and this salivary amylase is acting upon the carbohydrate. Okay, so you will find that after some time the starch will indeed be broken down. Okay, it will be broken down into carbohydrate, which is the starch, will be broken down into simple sugar. Okay, it will be broken down into simple sugar. That simple sugar can be, you know, it can be maltose, it can be dextrin. So these are some of the simple sugar into which the starch will break down in the presence of salivary amylase. And the same thing happens inside our body also. So can we not say that the reaction which is occurring inside our body can also be performed outside the body? But can we say that this test tube is a living thing? Only because the reaction is occurring inside the test tube, because this is a living reaction, isn't it? This is a living reaction, means the same reaction is occurring inside our living body. But can we consider this test tube as a living object? No. Why? Because for any system to be called as living, it has to have a cellular organization. Okay, a cellular organization has to be there. So the reaction which we are actually seeing here is a kind of living reaction, but it is an isolated living reaction. So let me write it here. It is known as the isolated living reaction. Why? Because it is isolated. Isolated means what? It is alone. It's a living reaction, but it is an isolated living reaction, which is not, it will not take place in the, it's actually not taking place in the living system. For this to be called as a living system, it has to have a cellular organization. Only if the reaction is occurring inside the cell, we can call it a living reaction. Or if it takes place inside a living body, we will say it is a reaction or a metabolism, which is see, this is the metabolism which is happening, right? The reaction which is occurring is a metabolism. We have discussed that. So you see, living reaction which is occurring here is isolated, and it does not have a cellular organization inside which it is occurring. That is why, though it is a living reaction, this entire system is not living. Okay, so this type of reaction which we do in the glass is known as in vitro. I'm sure you have heard of this term, in vitro isolated living reaction. Okay, so this is what an isolated living reaction means. Okay, now in exam, if you get this question, that can metabolism be categorized as a defining property of living organisms? Yes, it can, but the reaction should not be isolated. Okay, if it is an isolated living reaction, then this metabolism is not the characteristics of living being. But if it is occurring inside a cell, it is a defining feature. Okay, let's read what's written here and then we'll move ahead. Metabolic reactions can be demonstrated outside the body. That is what we have seen just now. The metabolic reaction, the example that I took was of salivary amylase digesting the carbohydrate. So that metabolic reaction can be demonstrated outside the body also. In a cell-free system, means there is no involvement of cell. It's only the test tube into which we are doing the reaction. An isolated metabolic reaction. Okay, so now you understand what this isolated metabolic reaction is. That isolated metabolic reaction outside the body of an organism performed in a test tube is neither a living or non-living. So completely it's not living also and it is not non-living also. Why? Because the same reaction is occurring inside our body also. Hence, very important line this is, children. You get many questions from here. Hence, while metabolism is a defining feature, okay, metabolism is a defining feature of all living organism without exception. I told you no that there will come a characteristic which will have no exceptions at all. So all living organisms will be performing this metabolism irrespective of whether they are growing or they are reproducing. It doesn't matter. If anything is alive, it will have metabolism occurring inside their cell. Okay. Isolated metabolic reaction, which is in vitro. In vitro means what? In glass or in a test tube. Isolated metabolic reactions are not living things. We cannot consider a test tube as a living thing, but surely a living reaction. But the reaction that is occurring inside the test tube is a living reaction as it occurs inside a living body, but the entire system will not be known as the living thing. Hence, and what is required for it to be called as a living thing? The cellular organization. Hence, cellular organization of the body is the defining feature of life forms. So any life form that we can think of has to have a cellular organization. If it does not have a cellular organization, the metabolism will not occur inside their body and we will not call them as a living entity. For example, I'm sure you all have heard about the viruses, right? We don't consider virus as a living object or a living thing, let's say. Why? Because viruses do not have cellular organization. No cellular organization. No cellular organization is present in virus. So how does organization? How does a virus replicate and all? We have discussed this in the previous classes also, in class 10th also, 9th also, 8th also. We have talked a little bit about how viruses replicate. They have to first enter the living system, right, which is our cell, and then inside the cell it will start to function utilizing the machinery of our cell only, and then it will try to replicate. So unless the virus is inside the body, it cannot be considered as a living entity, right, because it does not have a cellular organization. So that is why it is said that cellular organization of body is the defining feature of all life forms. Very important. Okay, so the first criteria for anything to be called alive, which based on which we can define a living organism, is metabolism, right? So growth was not a defining feature, reproduction was not a defining feature, but this metabolism is indeed a defining feature without exception that all living organisms will undergo. Okay. Next comes your another feature known as consciousness. Consciousness, as you all know, we keep on using these words such as being conscious, subconscious, unconscious, isn't it? So what does this consciousness mean? Consciousness only means that we are aware of our surrounding. Okay. So what do we mean by being aware of our surrounding? For example, a very good example would be if it is too hot outside, how do you come to know that it is too hot outside? There must be some sense organs inside your body. If it is too cold, again there must be some sense organ which is actually telling you that yes, it is cold outside. or if it is hot outside, or if somebody pinches you, you feel the pain. So how do you feel the pain? Because of the sense organs present in your body, isn't it? So because of those sense organs, we have our consciousness. Whether it's a bacteria or a human being, both of them are conscious of their surrounding. Even bacteria can detect that if at certain distance there is a toxic thing present or a poison present, I should go there or no, I should avoid it or no. Whether if something is a heated thing, I should avoid it. Something which is very cold, I should avoid it. So they also have a sense by which they can perceive their environment. That is what consciousness means, and that is also an exclusive property only of living organisms. So consciousness also is a defining feature. So first defining feature was metabolism, and second one is consciousness. As you can see here, the 5 sense organs that we have, these are the ones which help us to respond to stimuli. Stimuli is what? Any external change in the environment which compels you to react. So stimuli such as heat or cold or pain, all these are stimuli, and that will be felt by your 5 senses only. Okay, so with the help of these sense organs, we are conscious. Likewise, in plants also, we have certain stimuli also, and the responses of the plant also. So they also respond. So we can say that they are also living, right? So consciousness is a very broader term, and it is applicable to all the living organisms. It doesn't matter if it is a single celled organism or it's a multi-celled organism, all of them will show some amount of consciousness. The only difference is that we human beings are self-aware also. You know, if you compare yourself with a dog, let's say, or a bear, let's say, okay? So a dog or a bear are not self-aware. They are conscious. There's no problem with that, but they are not self-aware, okay? They being self-aware means what? You taking decisions, complex decisions that are taken by you, that in this situation, what should I do? What shouldn't I do? Taking that decision, or how should I groom myself? How should I improve myself? How should I learn more things? So basically it's the intelligence. Okay, I'm not saying that the animals are not intelligent, of course they are, but then again, the kind of decisions that you can take about yourself, the animals will not be able to do so because they are not self-aware. So one thing which makes human beings different from all other animals is the self-awareness. Okay, now you see, if I talk about a human being who is unconscious or who is in coma, let's say, okay, so in coma what happens? The human being lies there on the bed without any consciousness. Maybe heart and the lungs and all are all functional because of the machines which it is connected to. The human being is connected to those machines, and that is what is keeping it alive. So it does not have any consciousness, isn't it? So can we call it a living thing? So based on the consciousness, we cannot call it. But then again, number of metabolic reactions are already occurring inside their cell. No, that is why it is a living entity. We haven't called it a dead thing, isn't it? So yes, they are also living because metabolism is occurring inside, though consciousness is not there. Let's read through it. The most complicated feature of all living organisms is the ability to sense their surrounding and respond to these environmental stimuli, which could be physical, chemical, or biological. So these stimulus that we are talking about, which will compel us to react, can be physical, or it can be chemical, or it can be biological. The various external factors to which living organisms respond. What are those stimulus that we are talking about? These are the various external factors only, and that will compel us to react or respond. They can be what? They can be light, water, temperature, pollutants, other organisms, etc. There can be so many different things to which we react. Light duration or photo period affects many seasonal breeders, plants as well as animals. Yes, very important and true also. Light duration, which is known as the photo period. Okay, you see there are so many different kinds of plants which will not flower or which will not give fruit unless they are provided certain amount of light. Okay, that is why you find that there are many seasonal plants. For example, mango. Okay, you will not find mango growing in the winter season. Why? Because the amount of sunlight and the water that is required by the plant is not provided in that month. It is only provided in the month where there is abundant sunlight and rainfall, isn't it? That is why mangoes are grown in summer. Likewise, there are so many different plants which do the same thing, which means that the light duration is very, very important. How much amount of light it is receiving is important for them to flower and reproduce. That is why it is written that photoperiod affects many seasonal breeders, plants as well as animals. So it's not only the plants that get affected, it's also the animals. Animals also don't breed all the time in a year. It's a specific season in which they breed, isn't it? You must have observed that also. So that is true. All organisms are aware of their surrounding, right? That is true. They are all aware of their surrounding. That is what consciousness is. But human beings are the only organisms who are self-aware, who is aware of himself. That is self-conscious. Okay. So human beings are a little different. They are self-conscious. They can make decisions. They can move in a direction in which they will think that it will improve my ability. So all those kind of decisions which are taken as known as being self-conscious. Consciousness is a defining property of all living organisms. So it's written here now that consciousness can be taken as a defining property of any living organism. In human beings, it is more difficult to define a living state because, you know, patients lying in coma, supported by machines that replace hearts and lungs, are all brain dead with no self-consciousness, right? But even then, they are considered as living, though they are not conscious because of the metabolism that is occurring inside them. Is it clear, everyone? Any questions, any confusion till here? Tell me fast.
No, sir.
Yes, children, shall we move ahead? See, most of the things we have already covered, so it's just a revision for you all. Let's move on quickly to body organization. So another characteristic is body organization. What we mean by body organization, what we mean by body organization is that our body is made up of small units. Okay, so if you remember your previous classes in your class 8th or 9th or 10th also, you must have seen that cell is the fundamental unit of which all living organisms are made. When group of cells combine together to perform one specific function, we start calling them as tissues, isn't it? Lots of tissues combine together to become an organ, and then lots of organs coordinate with each other to become an organ system, right? And this organ system together makes up an organism. Okay, an organism. If we go a little back, means if we go beyond the cell, what is the cell made up of? If we have to ask you, you will say ki, sir, cell is made up of different organelles, isn't it? Different organelles. So let's put cell in one side, and then we have certain organelles. But what are these organelles made up of? Of course, the organelles are also made up of certain chemicals, such as lipid is there, protein is there. So all those organelles are a result of different chemicals, isn't it? And what are these chemicals made up of? These chemicals are ultimately made up of different compounds, isn't it? Many different types of compounds will be there, and these compounds will be made up of different molecules, isn't it? And these molecules will ultimately be made from different atoms. So atoms are the smallest unit of anything, whether it's a living thing or a non-living thing. You see, there is a very thin line between a living and a non-living. We all are made up of atoms. We can divide the atoms also into further categories: electron, proton, neutron, protino, electrino, neutrino, and many other particles, quark particles and all. But then again, we are not going to go into that, because atoms we are considering here as the smallest unit of any living or non-living thing. So lots of atoms combine together in fixed ratio to become molecules. Molecules, again, different molecules will combine together to be called as compounds. Okay, I'm sure in chemistry you have heard about all these terms, so you know. Now these compounds will make different chemicals, and the chemicals which we are talking about will ultimately organize themselves in such a way that certain organelles will be formed inside a cell, isn't it? Now different organelles will combine together, they will interact with each other, they will talk to each other, and then they will make up a cell. So can we say that a cell will behave like an organelle? No, we cannot. A cell is a different entity which is made up of different organelles. So a cell cannot be called as organelles, or we cannot say that the cell is performing the function of an organelle. Organelle can be many different things, like mitochondria is there, let's say. Okay, mitochondria is there, or let's say Golgi body is there. Okay, many different kinds of organelles are there. So can we say that a cell is a mitochondria? No. Can we say a cell is a Golgi body? No. Can we say that mitochondria is a cell or Golgi body is a cell, vice versa? No. Okay, so because of the accumulation of different organelles, our cell is made. Likewise, the functions of a cell is very different from the function of a tissue, isn't it? We cannot say that a tissue is a cell, or we cannot call a cell is a tissue, because what function a cell is performing individually is not the function that is performing by the tissue, because they different kinds of cells are, you know, coming together and they are working to perform one specific function, but individually cells are performing many other functions also. Likewise, it is true for the tissue and organs also, right? And likewise for all other things. So individually, the function that it is performing, when they accumulate their function, when you accumulate their function, they collectively perform one function, which is only exhibited by that particular organization. Like for a tissue will be performing a different function. A cell will be performing a different function at its level. Okay, so let's try to understand this with an example. Let's say a tissue. Our blood is a tissue, a kind of tissue, right? It's a fluid connective tissue, if you remember. Fluid connective tissue. This is what a blood is, fluid connective tissue. So there are different kinds of cells. Like for example, in blood we have RBCs also, we have WBCs also, you know, we have WBC, we have platelets, right? But these are all different entities which are doing different functions. But together, when we combine them, they form a blood, which is a tissue. Are you getting the point? So individually, we cannot say that a cell is doing a function of a tissue or tissue is doing a function of a cell. So let's see what is written here in body organization. All living phenomena are due to underlying interactions. As we all know, that there has to be a continuous interaction between the living systems, in between the living systems. Whatever is present inside a living system, they need to continuously interact with each other. Properties of tissues are not present in the constituent cells. As we have discussed just now, property of a tissue is not present in the constituent cell, but arise as a result of interactions among the constituent cells. So different cells, when they are interacting with each other, they are performing a function of a tissue. But individually, we cannot say that tissue and cells are the same thing. Similarly, properties of cellular organelles. Right now, we discussed about the different organelles are not present in the molecular constituent of an organelle. Means that if there is an organelle, let's say this is a mitochondria. Okay, this is a mitochondria. Now, this mitochondria is made up of outer membrane. It's made up of inner membrane. It is also made up of different fluids that are present, which is called matrix. And then it also have a nucleic acid inside. Okay, it also has ribosomes inside. So these individual components, when we talk about the membrane or the ribosome or the protein that is present inside, when we individually talk about them, it's not that that particular thing is doing the function of mitochondria. No, they are continuously interacting with each other in order for mitochondria to function properly. That is what is written here. Properties of cellular organelle are not present in the molecular constituent. Molecular constituents are what? The ribosomes, the proteins, the fat molecules, all these are the molecular constituents of the organelle. But the function of a cellular organelle only arise as a result of interactions among the molecular components comprising the organelle. So all of them need to interact in order for the organelle to perform. Likewise, all organelles need to interact with each other for one single cell to perform. Likewise, one single cell will not function for a tissue. All the different cells need to interact with each other to become a tissue. That is what the main crux of these points are. Therefore, we can say that living organisms are self-replicating. Again, children, very important. Now, after doing all these things about living organisms, now if you are asked to define a living organism, how are you going to do so? So this is what is a definition that has been given, and you need to remember that. We can say that living organisms are self-replicating, very, very important. They need to replicate in order to become from 1 to 2 or 2 to 4. They need to replicate by cell division. So, of course, all living organisms show replication. Evolving and self-regulating. Continuously, they have to evolve. Okay, and they are self-regulated. Nobody is going to regulate them from outside. It is being regulated from inside only. Your body knows when to when to perspire, or let's say when to feel hungry. So all these things are done by your body. It's not that some outside force is doing that, right? So that is what self-regulating means. Interactive system, they are continuously interacting with each other, capable of responding to external stimuli. See, everything is covered here in the definition of something being called alive. All the functions that we have seen above are given here. Means that they are self-replicating, they are also evolving, they are self-regulating, they are interacting with each other, they are capable of responding to external stimuli, which is the consciousness. So this is what a living organism is. Diversity in the living world. As we have seen earlier also, children, diversity means what? The different varieties of organisms that exist in our world. Different kinds of living organisms, be it a plant or an animal or a bacteria or anything. What is their diversity? Means how many of them are there, what are the different types of them which are there. You see, it is about 1.7 to 1.8 million species that are known and described, you know. So this question has also come in your exam. That the question was given that how many known species are there. Currently, how many species are known and described? The options given were 1.7 to 1.8 million, 1.6 to 1.4 to 1.6 million, 2.2 to 2.5 million, like this. And then it was asked what should be the correct answer. The answer is 1.7 to 1.8. At least this is what is written in your NCERT, so you need to follow this. But then children, again, you know, these data are very old data, because in your NCERT these data which is given is like more than 10 years old. Because nowadays, in within those 10 years, there are a lot many species that have also been discovered. Every day more than hundreds of species are discovered, you know. So if you keep on accumulating those number of species of with in 10 years, of course this number must have increased. But then again, whatever is written there in your book, you need to follow that. Okay, so about 1.7 to 1.8 million species are known and described. Some organisms are so small that they cannot be seen with the naked eye. Of course, we know we are talking about the unicellular organisms, and some are very huge in size. That also we know. They are found in wide range of habitats. What is this habitat? Habitat means where anything lives, right? So they are found in wide range of habitats, like they can be found in the oceans also. They can be found in the forests also, lakes also, deserts also. And not only these places, they are also found in thermal vents. We have seen about the archibacteria also, no? In the next chapter, we have seen about that. Archibacteria is there, which survives in very hot springs also, in the acidic conditions also, you know. All those places, they can be found. So they have diverse range of habitats. All these organisms which live on Earth together make up biodiversity. So what is biodiversity? The word bio itself means living, and diversity means of different types. So different types of living organisms are living on this Earth. Okay. So in order to study those organisms, we need to name them. Okay, we need to name them. How will I know which organism you are talking about? Suppose you went to a forest and then you found a very different looking organism there. You saw it, which you have never seen before. You bring it home. Okay, and then you call me and say, sir, I have got an organism and I have kept it in my jar and I don't know what it is. Okay, so of course the first thing which you will need to do in order for you to communicate with me is naming it. So you will start finding its name. If this organism was discovered earlier, so what was its name? So naming anything is very important. Once you name it, you can at least tell everyone that this is what I have found. Suppose you have found a very different organism which is not found before. Okay, very new organism, a new species you have found. So the first thing you need to do is to name it. Otherwise, how will you communicate with other people that what you have found? So if you name it, one person will know its name, second person will know its name, third person will know its name, and the entire world will come to know its name. Now, when somebody else catches that same organism, and if you have already named it, then it becomes very easy for him. He will simply say, I have caught something called A or B, and everyone will come to know which organism I'm talking about. That is why naming any organism becomes very, very important. And the system of naming is known as nomenclature. Okay. Nomenclature means naming an organism so that it is known by the same name all over the world. Okay. So it has to be named in such a way that all the world knows it by the same name. But that does not happen. Suppose you are living in, let's say, Tamil Nadu. Okay. And in the forest of Tamil Nadu, you caught an organism. Then, of course, you are going to name it in Tamil only. You're not going to name it in English or Hindi, right? So that Tamil word that you are talking about is very, very local. Means that locally people will come to know that yes, this is the name of an organism. But then again, when you go to other parts of the country or the other parts of the world, they may not be familiar with the name that you are using. So there has to be a universal naming system, isn't it? One name should be there which would be understood and accepted by all the human beings on this earth. So that naming system is the nomenclature, and that naming system is given by the two different organizations which are known by the name ICBN and ICZN. Okay, so what they do is, suppose a new organism is found, that organism is taken to these organizations, and first they are decided whether it should fall under the category of animals or the plants. If it is animals, then it goes to International Code for Zoological Nomenclature. If it is a plant, it goes to International Code for Botanical Nomenclature. And then based on the characteristics that they have, these bodies give it their name. Okay, so the naming will be given by them, and that name is accepted by the entire community in the entire world. Okay, so everyone will know by the same name. So everyone will come to know which organism I'm talking about. So naming an organism is should be same all over the world. Nomenclature or naming is only possible when the organism is described correctly and we know to what organism the name is attached to. This is what identification means. Okay, so first we need to identify it, then we need to name it, and then we need to classify it. Okay, so these three things are important: identification, nomenclature, and classification. So you need to understand this in sequence only. First comes your identification, okay, then comes your nomenclature, and then comes your classification. How can you remember this? Classification. How can you remember that? You can remember by Indian National Congress, INC. You must have studied in your history also. Indian National Congress, INC. In this sequence only you have to remember, because questions have been asked. If you remember, I took the test and gave the same question, that what is the first thing that you are going to do? Will it be identifying, nomenclating, or classification? The answer was identification. So it starts with identification. First you identify it, and then you name it, and then you classify it. The two bodies that are giving the names, which is universally accepted, are ICBN and ICZN. Please remember the full forms also. Then we have there are two components of scientific names: generic name and specific epithet. This system of providing name to two components was known as binomial nomenclature. You're already familiar with what binomial nomenclature is. We have discussed this in class 9th also. Binomial nomenclature was given by Carolus Linnaeus. We already know the name of this scientist. For example, one of those example that is given is mango, which is the scientific name is Mangifera indica, and where Mangifera indicates your genus and indica represents your species. We are going to talk about this in details as we move on, because we need to study about the nomenclature and the rules of how the nomenclature is given. Okay, so that we will do it in the next class, children. Let's end our class here.